All right, so we're going to talk about the development of the discipline. That's political science. And this is one of two short lectures that covers, almost 100 years worth of progress. So there will be things that I leave out. There will be things that you'll have questions on that we will address in class. All right, so let's get started. As you can see in front of you, this is my master timeline of big events. Many of these are particularly relevant to the field of comparative politics, but American politics, international relations, they're all following the same general trend line. So if you look at this, let me see if I can get my little laser pen going. If you look here, we start around 1900, and it's really at the turn of the 20th century when you begin to get the study of governments more generally. Most of these studies follow what's known as an old institutionalism model, which is effectively you're looking at schematics of governments, what offices lie where, who responds to whom, what does the Constitution, if there is one, lay out, etc. This is the general approach during this first period, and this is even before political science is codified as a field. So early 20th century, a lot of what does the government look like type of studies. There is a lot to be said for the development of this particular timeline, and I'm going to just highlight a couple key points here. Notice there's this vast space between 1900 and World War II, and it's after World War II that you see some pretty significant contributions, right? We can talk about the behavioral revolution, modernization, dependency theory. We can also talk about these developments in all the other sub-disciplines, American politics, international relations, generally speaking. But what's key here is that during this early period, up until World War II, political science as a field doesn't really exist. It's really history, philosophy. It's a variety of different fields, anthropology, studies that focus on the national character, on the structure of government, the functions of those government offices, etc. It's not until World War II and after World War II that we see political science become a field in its own right. So political science is a fairly young field. We're talking about less than 100 years old at this point. And you're going to notice that after World War II, there are some, so at the top of the timeline here, there are some big contributions from authors, right here and here. Big contributions from authors, which kind of set the standard, the debate, the paradigm, if you will, in the field of comparative politics specifically, but this is also true in American politics. There are some really good parallel studies to these. More importantly, I want you to focus on the bottom of this timeline, which shows that there are some major movements, right? Right after World War II, we see the behavioral revolution, which takes place in the other social sciences, sociology, anthropology, etc., and makes its way into political science. In fact, it's deeply embedded in political science. That behavioral revolution really carries on for quite some time. It's not until the 1970s, right here, you see the rational choice theory, that you see the widespread adoption of economic theories. And it is after the 1970s that you see a lot of focus on econometric models, contributions to the discipline from economics, and then of course you see this like rapid growth after that period of another major paradigm, which is sort of a more institutional model, a neo-institutional model, which does away with the old concepts of old institutionalism and focuses in a way on merging different fields together, including rational choice theory, economics, and institutions. All right, so to summarize, oops, let's see if I can get rid of this pen. All right. To summarize, we have political science as a field that really emerges from other fields, like history, right, among others. It makes extraordinary gains from the fields of sociology, economics, and anthropology. In fact, these additions explain the variety of methods and approaches that are used in the discipline, and we'll talk more about that next. And there is incredible post-World War II growth. This is important for a number of reasons. For one, it means that the discipline, which of course you know is quite young, is concerned with some very real-world concerns, right? Some of the issues, some of the questions that political scientists are asking during this time deal with topics like what causes war, what triggered the Holocaust, what makes fascism possible, and what makes democracy survive, among others. These are enduring questions that we are still asking today. The reason why these questions are asked is because political scientists were directly affected by these big real-world events. As a matter of fact, it is we as a field, we gain tremendously from the emergence of scholars who come to the U.S., which is where political science is rooted as an academic discipline, from places where war, World War II, took place, right? So you've got lots of scholars that fled Hitler's Germany, that fled conflict in Europe, who come to the United States, and they are asking these very real, very important questions. So these are not just esoteric, what happens if you run into a fly, will it produce more secretions? No, no one cares about that. We're concerned about real-world issues that had real impacts on the lives of these scholars. In many cases, the diaspora of Jewish scholars across the world has a direct impact on political science because it does affect the kinds of questions that we ask, because these folks were directly affected by the war, by the Holocaust, by fascism, by the decline of democracies as a result of what leads to World War II. And of course, the field itself becomes more focused on an empirical scientific approach, moving away from description of governments, from assessments born of one's own anecdotal understanding of humankind, of what the national character is of one country versus the other. Instead, the field becomes very highly empirical. This is evident in international relations by the contributions of Hans Morgenthau, who says we need to be an empirical study. We're not concerned with questions of morality. We need to know what's going on because we need to understand the world, what triggers war, right? The same is true in American politics, where the empirical approach and the adoption of the behavioral school means, among other things, that we are trying to directly measure what is going on in the world. We are trying to understand human beings, and we are trying to be able to predict, right? So it's truly a scientific approach. The field becomes very concerned with these issues, and when we return next time, we'll talk a little bit more about those methodological approaches that we see, the big contributions of those approaches, and how they impact the way we study the world.